Instead, I want to look back at a much earlier time, perhaps a simpler time, was Academy 2019. That was the first Academy and the first time we were talking about the then upcoming release of Qt 6 and what that means for us. We had a BOF where we brainstormed some initial ideas of where we want to go with this transition. And we decided we need a sprint for this. So in late 2019, we met in Berlin for a sprint, which, as far as I remember, was our first hybrid sprint, and discussed some topics around Qt 6 and Framework 6. And one of the things we did was set out design goals for KDE Framework 6. One of them being we want porting to Qt 6 and KF6 to be as easy as possible, which is also something that Qt wanted for their 5 to 6 transition. And we wanted cuts in the API to be clear and don't have any surprises and be as intuitive and ergonomic as possible. And we wanted to delay the point where we are in a phase of active breakage as much as possible and do a lot of the work we want to do very early in the process on top of the existing code base, and only at a later point go all in on jumping on the new thing. Then, of course, we wanted to improve our APIs, make them more intuitive, easier to use, harder to misuse. Then we wanted to drop some old ballast, things we don't want anymore or can't maintain anymore, concepts that are broken or obsolete, and generally not ready for the future. Then a lot of our stuff is built on Qt widgets, but there's more and more apps using QML. And we wanted to have a clean separation between API that is for either of those toolkits or that is common between those two and can be shared. Then we wanted to improve the cross-platform support of our APIs and make it easier to build apps for Android, Windows, macOS, and so on, which sometimes means having a cleaner separation between an interface to something and the implementation. So how did the time continue? In late 2020, there was the first Qt 6 release. And naturally, it didn't take very long for us to start building against that. In the initial phase, this was mostly done ad hoc without much coordination. And it was only in 2021 that we started doing things properly and introduced Qt 6-based CI builds, which then allowed us to actually start actively porting things while still keeping compatibility with Qt 5. Then, fast forward a bit, in January 2023, we started branching out KF6, which mostly meant creating a branch for Frameworks 5, for that to be continued in that branch. And from then point on, master was Qt 6 only. Soon after that, Plasma and some other projects also started doing that, but applications for the most part kept building against both at the same time. Then last year at Academy in Greece was the last talk I gave on this topic. And back then I promised that was going to be the final talk about this topic, which turned out to be a bit of a lie. So sorry about that. And I raised the question of, are we there yet? So then in November of that year, we had the first release of what we then call the mega release, because for logistical reasons, we decided to release Plasma 6.0, Framework 6.0, and the Gear release at the same time, which was necessary because there's a lot of subtle interdependencies between all three of them. So releasing them together made things a lot easier to manage. In December, we had the betas. In January, we had the release candidates for them. And then in February 2024, at long last, almost 5 years about talking this initially, we had a mega release. Some applause would be nice. So, how did our users receive this mega release? In a lot of ways, it was received very positively. People liked it. It was cool. We had cool features. And what I particularly liked is that during these alpha, beta, and release candidate releases, a lot of people were testing it that usually aren't testing our pre-releases. So there was a lot of interest and a lot of activity around that topic, and the community was really looking forward to it. But of course, not everything was perfect. There were some bugs in the initial releases. Not as many as in previous transitions, but more than zero. We also made some design decisions that proved to be or were expected to be controversial, like dropping certain features, changing some defaults, or using Wayland by default, which is something we did for Plasma 6.0. Then, unfortunately, a lot of distros had somewhat broken rollout of all of this. During the alpha and beta phases, we worked quite a bit on creating packaging recommendations and guidelines for shipping this release for distributions because it wasn't trivial. There were a lot of subtle things to watch out and projects that needed to be built against both Qt 5 and Qt 6. So we wanted to make sure that this is as smooth as possible for distributions, which mostly worked out, I think. There were two major problems. One of them is being the initial rollout of 6.0 in Neon was very rough and had some quite major bugs, which mostly came down to very Neon specific process problems. And I'm not quite sure what to do about it, but it was already discussed in a sort of post-mortem session on the Neon side. And then the other big problem was that certain distributions, Arch, were deliberately ignoring some of our packaging recommendations, which mostly meant not shipping various Qt 5 support integration packages by default, which caused broken support for Qt 5 applications. And we got a lot of bug reports and complaints and support requests about this. But it was just Arch being Arch. And another thing that wasn't quite good is a lot of the APIs in Plasma targeted towards third-party developers like Plasmoids, QuinEffects, QuinScript had breaking changes, and we weren't always good about documenting these. So naturally, a lot of people wanted to update their third-party content to Plasma 6, but often didn't have any documentation on how to do that, which caused understandable frustration. So, looking a bit on the API side, did we succeed in our design goals? On the positive side, we had a lot of simplifications in our frameworks and Plasma, which meant that some things that previously would have been very hard to implement or fix were now easy to do. This is something mostly I or other people involved in this process noticed because we know what we did and how it was before. But the thing is, a lot of people coming after us won't even notice that because they just see, oh, okay, it's easy, but they don't know all of the work that went into that being easy. On the negative side, we had a few API design decisions that turned out to be problematic in some ways because they weren't obvious to use and hard to misuse, which caused some bugs more than I would have liked. And some of these API decisions were done by myself, so I have no one to blame but myself. Then, during the initial phase of deprecating things and then introducing a replacement for something, then deprecating it, and then putting everything away, I think we did a quite good job of documenting all of this in like deprecation documentation. So people generally knew how to port away from these. But there was a phase where we stopped doing that because master was KF6 only. And we were in a phase where we allowed ourselves to break APIs with all the proper deprecation process, which made a lot of things very easy and convenient to do for us that otherwise wouldn't have been possible. But we didn't always do a good job of documenting this to people porting after us. We had a policy of if you drop something, you need to port all of the users that are currently on KF6, which worked okay. But if someone didn't port at that time, but is porting now, they sometimes run into problems with, hey, how do I actually port this? And we don't have any documentation for it. And the documentation for the general porting process was mostly a bunch of academy talks from me, but not much in written form. Which people did actually port is a commit to send people a link to so that people can then go. But try finding that commit 3 years later when you're porting something. It's a lot of work that shouldn't be necessary. Then during the initial KF6 sprint, we created a very large workboard with a couple of hundred tasks on it of things that we want to do. We didn't get to do all of them. Some of them because we decided, okay, this is not worth doing actually. Some of them were decided, okay, we don't actually need to do this now. We can always do it later and we don't need to break API for it. But for some of them, we just missed the window of doing them because too many other things to do. And the whole process already took enough time and we didn't want to indefinitely delay it until everything is perfect. So at some point we had to ship because it got unsustainable to just keep iterating on unstable master, and eventually we just needed to ship something. And similarly, we had a lot of to-do KF6 comments throughout our code. Not all of them did get addressed. So they're now in good company with some of the to-do KF5 comments. And somewhat recently, we introduced the first to-do KF7 comments. And some of the API changes, in particular, that's something we noticed in Kirigami, came quite late in the process, which wasn't great because then we had to do a lot of last minute porting. But that was also complicated by the fact that we had a pretty good strategy for evolving C++ API. Introduce a replacement, port all of the users, deprecate the old thing, and then at branching, remove the thing. Worked out quite well. For QML, it was a lot harder because all of the deprecation warning markup and if-defs and compatibility builds don't really work with QML. And you don't have a good way to do version-dependent code in QML. So it was very hard and basically next to impossible to have QML apps work against both Qt 5 and Qt 6, which is a fact that I lamented quite a lot. So this week at the Contributor Summit, we actually had a very good conversation with some of the QML people about how we can support this use case better in the future, which is gonna stay relevant even when most of the transition is done by now. Talking about challenges, we had a few. First and foremost, while this transition was nowhere near as painful as previous transitions, so I've heard, I haven't been part of any of the previous ones, it was still a lot of work because we have a lot of code. When I'm doing presentations for different audiences than just KDE, I like to introduce ourselves with, we have about 15 million lines of C++ and QML code. That's a lot. And even if there are only small changes needed, if you multiply that by 15 million lines of code, that's still a lot. And sometimes you need to touch code that you really don't want to touch because nobody understands it, but you need to touch it anyway because it uses something that doesn't exist anymore, or you want to get rid of a certain API or any reason. And sometimes that took a bit of a leap of faith and a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to to make sure it keeps working. Then we also depend on some third-party modules that are also based on Qt. So we also needed Qt 6 builds of them, which in most cases wasn't much of a problem because upstreams were receptive about either did it themselves or were receptive about us porting them to Qt 6. In some cases, it took a bit longer than necessary for them to accept and release our changes. We still have some libraries in the K account stack that aren't released against Qt 6 yet, but basically distros now ship our sort of fork of it. But it worked out okay enough in the end. Then when Qt 6.0 was released, there was a bit of functionality missing that we were previously using that sometimes was clear, okay, this is not coming back because it was deprecated before. And sometimes we had to lobby them into adding back some of the APIs that we needed. And by around 6.5, we were mostly complete on that front. And the first release, or the first mega release, was against Qt 6.6. And to keep supporting Qt 5, we had to create the KDE patch collection because Qt 5 was closed for contributions and the LTS release was commercial only and open source was delayed by a year. So we needed a way for us to have patches for Qt for bug fixes that wasn't upstream Qt, which worked out okay enough, but it was hassle that I would have liked to avoid. So, with us being there yet, the obvious question is what comes next? And before we get into that, we need to ask ourselves, are we actually really there yet? While it's true that we have had the mega release and a lot of our applications and Plasma built against Qt 6, we still have some of them that built and released against Qt 5. That's a problem because, well, here it says Qt 5 is out of support. Today I learned from Volker Hilsheimer that this isn't actually quite true because there's still a small amount of things going on there and getting released. But for all intents and purposes, consider Qt 5 dead. And Qt 6 in many ways is just better. Even if your application isn't actually using any of the new API, some of the improvements under the hood makes the experience of using them just a lot better. This is particularly the case of Wayland support, which improved a lot in Qt 6 and fixed some long-standing problems there, which is very important given that Wayland is the default now. Then moving on to KF5, it's still technically officially maintained and released, but in practice, not a lot is happening there. So while it's still possible to get bug fixes in there, very few people actually do it, so it doesn't receive much improvement, while KF6 is very actively developed. And it pains me to admit it, but support for running Qt 5 applications in an otherwise Plasma 6 session is also subtly broken in some cases. For example, anything that relies on plugins needs those plugins to be built against Qt 5 and Qt 6. And distros either don't ship them or we don't even provide them properly upstream. So there's a lot of subtly broken things here and there that just work fine in a completely KF6 session. All of this raises the obvious question, do we or can we or when can we drop support for Qt 5 in our CI infrastructure, in our build systems, and so on and so forth? I do not have the answer to that. A large factor we need to take into account is that there's still distributions out there that ship Plasma 527 and KF5 and KF5 based apps. And this includes also this year's Ubuntu LTS releases, which for unfortunate but understandable reasons doesn't ship Plasma 6 yet. And that will be supported by Ubuntu officially for the next 2 years. I'm not sure whether we can afford to ignore that. So that's perhaps something to discuss this week or the next weeks, months, and year. We could. Okay, what's next for our software platform? So, to answer the question of what is next for the KDE community, we just elected some new goals, which is generally the best indication of what's next for us as a community. As it stands, my personal goal proposal got selected, which is all about improving the application development experience. And naturally, there's a huge overlap between that and all of the work we've been doing on modernizing and polishing and porting to Qt 6 our frameworks and software platform. And generally, we should just continue what we've been doing in the initial phase of the Qt 6 port, which is just finding APIs that are problematic and we don't like anymore, introduce replacements, and deprecate the old thing. It will probably be a while until we can drop them, but at least having them deprecated means it will be dropped eventually, and it tells people, this isn't good API, don't use it. Then a topic that keeps appearing again and again is Wayland. We made Wayland the default, which was a somewhat controversial decision, but as far as I'm concerned, it was the right one. And according to our user feedback statistics, about 80% of Plasma 6 users are using Wayland right now. Wayland still isn't perfect, and we as a community need to come together and address those problems. Historically, it has been mostly the case that most of the work on improving the Wayland experience have been driven by a few Plasma and Quinn maintainers, but this doesn't scale. So most of the big issues in Wayland are addressed by now or in the process of getting addressed, but there's still a very long tail of small quality of life annoyances and things that are subtly broken. And it can't be the responsibility of David Edmondson and Flood alone to fix all of the things in Wayland. And we as application developers need to watch out for things that we can do in our application code to fix those little Wayland annoyances. Because in a lot of cases, it's the application that's wrong, not the toolkit or the compositor. Then earlier today, David was talking about Flatpak, snaps, immutable distros, and sandboxing, which, according to him, and I very much value his opinion, is one of the things that we should be watching out for and focusing on for the foreseeable future, which is something I can very much agree with. And as David mentioned in his talk, there's quite a few things to be addressed there. And there's the seemingly never-ending debate about the merits of Qt widgets versus QML, where I don't see either of them going away anytime soon, but the trend clearly indicates that the favors are tilting towards QML. And we need to find some sort of answer to where do we want to position ourselves in that regard with our software platform. Then we just completed one transition, mostly anyway. What about the next one? Historically, it has been the case that these major version transitions have been driven by Qt releases. And this one has been no exception. But it also has been multiple transitions in a trench code. We had an API break in Qt, we had an API break in frameworks, we had an API break in Plasma. We had a sort of user experience break in the sense that we dropped some things, we changed some defaults, we made Wayland the default, we made some design changes, and all of that, or not all of that, is something that would be neatly justifiable in just a minor release. So having a point 0 release afforded us some leeway to do bigger changes that otherwise would have been more controversial. And we did the Wayland by default thing. All of those were done together at the same time. There were good reasons for doing it that way, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that way always. Here's a few questions I want to ask, and I don't really expect any answers to them right now. I also don't have anything concrete to propose. I just want to give you some food for your brain to think about some things for the foreseeable future. First of all, will there be a Qt 7? I asked the Qt people. Okay, that's surprisingly specific. Is that just extrapolating or? Right. So the big thing is nobody knows what's gonna happen. There may be it may be that Alan is perfectly on point with his extrapolation. It could be that 5 years from now we are all writing Electron apps. So we don't really know. We should prepare for the future where Alan is right and we have a Qt 7 release somewhat soon. But it doesn't have to be that way. Then something we noticed when doing all of this work with breaking stuff is actually very fun because, as I mentioned, things that were once hard are now easy, and doing some things becomes a lot more easy or even feasible in the first place by making breaking changes, which raises the question, should we do that more often? Because historically, our compatibility cycles in Qt and in frameworks have been very long, close to a decade in a lot of cases. It doesn't have to be that way. I'm not saying we should abandon API stability altogether, but we could meet somewhere in the middle and have, for example, a API break once a year or every 2 years. It doesn't have to be a decade. Also, something Qt and frameworks provide is ABI stability, which I want to raise the question of how valuable is this to the people that are delivering our software, which is mostly Linux distributions or ourselves via some sort of bundled format, whether that's Flatpak, Windows installers, Android APKs. Do we need ABI stability for this? And if not, what kind of nicer things would this allow us to have? And is it worth the cost of changing the stability guarantee? And another thing David mentioned earlier is, how does Flatpak and Snaps and immutable distros change all of the assumptions that we previously had and that influenced the way of us doing things? For example, we have a lot of functionality and integration points that basically assume we have a Linux distribution with one version of Qt installed and everything is built against that particular Qt. Basically, all of the plugin mechanisms rely on this fact. This already broke when we introduced Qt 6 in addition to Qt 5, which caused us a lot of headache. Now that we have containerized formats like Flatpak that do ship their own version of Qt, a lot of the plugin integration doesn't work anymore. And another aspect of Flatpak and all of the others, I don't want to single out Flatpak here, is that they ship their own version of Qt, so we can actually very easily have different versions of Qt or frameworks or any toolkit installed in any given system, which means that breaking APIs in there actually becomes a lot more affordable and might influence on how we see those stability guarantees for our libraries. But as I said, I don't have any concrete proposals here. I'm not advocating for breaking all of our stability guarantees tomorrow. But I'm looking forward to having your thoughts on all of this and where to go next with our software platform. So thank you.
So thank you, Nicolas, for your presentation. And yeah, do we have questions?
Yeah. You mentioned that the documentation changes and the missing documentation for porting. Personally, it would have been easier for me if at least the KF5 documentation would still be available somewhere, because KDLibs 4 documentation is still online, but KF5 is not. So do you have any plans to maybe add that?
Okay, there's two answers to this. One of them is it should be fairly easy for somebody like Ben to add the KF5 version as a read-only copy to the archive. The second answer to that is we did consider, can we provide both of them at the same time, which turned out to be very hard given our current documentation infrastructure, which is why we didn't do it, because nobody felt motivated enough to put in all the effort. What I am currently working right now is porting all of our documentation from Doxygen to QDoc, and this would actually make it a lot easier, and it's something that I'm actively looking out for to provide multiple versions of documentation in the future. Whether we are going to go through the effort of converting the existing KF5 API markup to the new format to allow that, I don't know. It would take someone very motivated to do that, so I'm not going to promise that. But at least looking to future transitions, this should become a lot more feasible.
Any further questions? I think over there is a question.
So before my question, I have a couple of comments, one of which is that your remark that Arch was being Arch could be said to have been a rather arch comment. But I just want to comfort you a little on one point as well, which is that you said you missed some to-dos. In the rush to the Qt 6 release, we had a mad rush to deal with a whole lot of # Qt6 to-do comments, and we did get quite a lot of them, but some of them had to be turned into Qt7 ones. So you're not alone. This is just how big releases go. And we have adopted a policy which you might want to think about for future reference, which is we now, as far as possible, if it is something to change at the next major release, we actually say if Qt major version is less than, sorry, is greater than or equal to 7, or we're in a bootstrap build, do it the future way. else, do it the old way, the way we're still doing it, so that when we hit Qt 7, we will automatically make the transition. The or bootstrap
similar in some cases.
The or bootstrap is there so that we will actually see most of the breakages before we get there.
Well, we don't have a bootstrap like that, so
yeah,
that's not going to be as practical. But yeah, you do have a good point. It's something we could have potentially used a lot more.
Finally, to my question, you mentioned touching some scary code. Did you record all the places you found scary code in a big list of come back with the flamethrower?
Not explicitly. This was actually a major reason of why we went through the trouble of killing a lot of things in frameworks, because it was scary code. And actually the mere thing of going through all of the code and looking for things that we could potentially do without was, at least for me, a very valuable lesson in getting to know our code base better, because now I have a very good overview of a lot of the frameworks code that I didn't used to have, even if not in all cases this resulted in actual changes being made. But the list is still somewhere there. Might be a good idea to formalize that.
We're going to get a bug tracker each start.
So actually, you were talking a lot about KDE in itself, but also there are external applications which use frameworks and Qt. And actually, from Debian, there's a lot of Qt 5 stuff still available, which isn't ported yet. So thinking about when to break API again, it will also happen that external applications get broken again, and distros need to work around. So this is really also something to think about, that things are used externally.
Yes, that is a very good point. And if we decide that having a more relaxed approach about API stability is the way to go, we probably want some sort of formal communication channel for that. And somewhat related to that, you bring up a good point with third-party Qt 5 applications, which is we have quite a few things that are only there to hook into Qt and provide some integration bits like plasma integration or breeze and oxygen styles and so on. So the decision of when to retire the Qt 5 versions of them is not only influenced by how many of our applications are ported, but also how many third-party Qt 5 applications are still out there and are implicitly using these things.
Okay. So yeah, thanks for the presentation and questions. And we are now running out